I'm Eric Lanigan with Lanigan Lanigan attorneys in Winter Park, Florida. I've had many people who have watched various videos that we've done and read some of our blog posts who, when they have come in, have commented that while all of the videos are educational and helpful, they really don't know anything about who is the person behind the voice. And it's been suggested that maybe I talk a little bit about who I am and how I got to be standing here today. And brief history, I've always lived in Florida. I moved to Winter Park with my family when I was 12 years old in 1963. And other than going away to college and law school, I've lived here in Winter Park my whole life. I went to Winter Park High School. I then went to Florida State University, graduated from Florida State in 1973, then went to Stetson Law School in St. Petersburg, graduated from Stetson in 1976, came back, decided that I wanted to practice in Winter Park. When you're in college and you go away, you visit friends, and when you do that and you see towns where other people live, I remember always thinking to myself, well, Winter Park's a pretty nice place. So I decided that I was going to come back here and live. So we came back here after law school. By that time I was married, and my son Roddy, who now practices with me, was a one-year-old baby. And we moved back to Winter Park. I got a job with a law firm here in town, very young, aggressive lawyers in personal injury. I worked there for 3 years, which was a tremendous opportunity to get in front of the judges, be in court, be taking depositions, getting to understand how litigation worked with some very good mentors who helped me along the way. After about 3 years of that, though, I had decided that I was not going to spend my legal career doing personal injury work. And I decided that I wanted to branch out and do other things. And by this time, my daughter had just been born, and I decided to leave and open up my own office. Many of my friends in my age group thought I was crazy to do that at that point. I told them, well, they were right. I was crazy, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And as I was telling a young lawyer the other day, it seems like a big leap of faith, but once you do it, and you never look back, and I've never regretted taking that step, because cases started coming in the door, business came in, I was able to branch out into other areas of the law, but I had an excellent foundation in how lawsuits work, how litigation works, and how to be an effective litigator. And being on my own all of those years, since I was 29 or 30, so I've been on my own basically for 33 years. It's a tremendous learning experience, because while it's time-consuming, you have to spend a lot of time figuring out how to do things, because you don't have somebody to go to and just tell you, okay, yes, this is how you do this, or this is how you do that. You have to go learn it. And what I've learned over the years is that in learning how to do one thing, in that research to get to that point, how many other things you learn as you go through that process. So it's very helpful to me in developing a thorough understanding of the law and how things work. And let's face it, you never understand how hard a wall is till you ram your head into it. And like any young lawyer, you've got to bang your head into the wall a few times, get some lumps, so you understand how to get things done and not spend the rest of your life banging your head into the wall. And that's been very helpful to me over the years. Over the years, my practice has evolved. When I first went out on my own, I used to say, when people would say, well, what's your specialty? Well, first of all, when you're 30, you don't have a specialty. But I used to say my specialty was entry law. And people would always look at me quizzically, like, what does that mean? And I'd say, well, if it comes through the entryway, I do it. But as you age up and you progress, you start to focus in on various areas of the law. You start to know what you like, you start to know what it is you don't like and you don't want to do anymore. I've always enjoyed the litigation part of it. I've enjoyed moving into different areas of litigation. Always found it challenging to not always be dealing in the same subject matter over and over again. Over the years, practice evolves. Sometimes it's where you direct yourself, and other times it's just where you end up. For example, bankruptcy is one of those areas. For many years, I had a client who would refer me bankruptcy cases because they had a business where they did counseling for people in financial straits. And every month there'd be a certain number, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, that really their only way out was to file bankruptcy. And so we would do anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 bankruptcies a month. And that went on for years. And then 2007 came, and I started to notice that 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 bankruptcies a month was suddenly 2 or 3 or 4 bankruptcies a week. And by the beginning of 2008, it was 2, 3, 4 new bankruptcies a day. So it's one of those things that it just explodes in front of you, not because you necessarily planned it that way, but you just happen to be, I guess you could say, in the right place at the right time, at least from a lawyer's perspective. And that's happened in other areas of the law as well. I've done a tremendous amount of securities litigation, representing people who have suffered investment in losses. And that was somewhat of a unique way that I got involved in that I was about 34, 35 at the time, and had really gotten somewhat burned out in law. And I suddenly woke up one day and decided that I was going to get involved in financial planning and working with securities, insurance, things like that, and deal in what I thought was a simpler part of people's lives. And I became securities licensed. I worked very hard in that field. And what happened after about 4 or 5 years in that arena is, because of my legal background, and I would meet people and they would tell me about these just terrible things that had gone on and the money that they had lost in investments. And I would help people deal with how to go about trying to recover those investments. And I remember very distinctly, I had 2 men come to me who sold securities, and they had been very active, involved in selling this one investment. They had sold it to their parents, their friends, and it turned out to be pretty much a scam. And they wanted me to represent literally their parents to try to get a recovery. And I told them that I really couldn't do it because the economics of it just wasn't there, because those individuals had not lost that much money, and the cost of trying to recover it, it wouldn't make any sense. And these 2 individuals said, well, what if we got you 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 people who had the same investment? Would it then be worth it? And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, well, yeah, I guess it would be. And literally within 2 weeks, they had referred in what amounted to 125 people, everywhere from Key West to Honolulu, who had invested in this investment vehicle, all wanted to hire me to recover the money. And I remember going home one night and saying to my wife, Jane, I said, well, I'm back in the law, because suddenly I had 125 of these security cases, and it took over my life. And that was probably around early 90s. And since then, I suddenly found myself back in the full-time practice of law, and have enjoyed it immensely since then. So in a way, getting out of the law, taking a breather from the practice of law for 4 or 5 years, gave me a fresh perspective on it, and it also, without my really intending it to be this way, I developed an education in a very specialized area, which was securities fraud. And I've always enjoyed that, and up until the bankruptcy explosion, that type of litigation, as well as real estate-oriented litigation, problems with the homes, termites, sinkholes, you name it, I've always done that type of litigation. That was the predominant area of my practice until this whole bankruptcy thing really exploded in 2007, 2008. And that has, you know, I think for the benefit of our economy, that has slowed down to a great deal. More, not quite where it was before 2007, but certainly much closer to that. And so since then, it's been a refocusing on a lot of the areas that I worked in before: securities litigation, real estate litigation. In fact, the first case I ever tried by myself in a jury trial, and I was probably 28, 29, 30 years old, was a case where I actually defended a real estate firm who was sued by someone who bought a home. Sure enough, they're in the home for a couple of months. They decide, gee, maybe we'll take this wall down. They pulled the wall down, and of course, the house is completely termite infested. So they sued the person who sold them the home. They sued the bug company. They sued the realtor. They basically sued everybody. And in that case, I represented the realtor, and that was the first jury trial I ever had, and it dealt with defective issues in a home, undisclosed issues or problems that you couldn't see until you actually pulled a wall down. So I think, like most lawyers in my age group, you have a history like that, where some things you directed yourself towards, other things just sort of seem to happen to you, and but it all works for the good. I've been practicing with my son now for 7 or 8 years. I guess time flies when you're having fun. And it's been a real joy to watch him grow and progress. He has an inherently aggressive nature, which suits him well for litigation-type activities. Like me, he's bumped into a few walls, which is a good experience, and all of which makes you a much better lawyer. And it's been a great deal of fun and an energizing thing for me to be in the practice with the next generation and watch him develop and learn and actually become, in many ways, a better lawyer than myself as he learns and progresses. And suddenly one day you wake up and you realize you're learning things from him. You're not so much sure how much he's learning from you anymore. And that's a fun thing for a dad, and it's something that I've really enjoyed. And so that's sort of the brief history of Eric Lanigan and the practice of law. I hope it helps to put things in context, so when you watch some of these other videos or read these blogs and you wonder, well, who is this guy and where does he come from and how did he get to be standing in front of me doing this video, you have a better sense of all of those, the answers to all of those questions. So appreciate your time. And again, I'm Eric Lanigan with Lanigan Lanigan Attorneys in Winter Park, Florida.